Hi, my name's Talya Kingston. I'm WAM Theatre's Associate Artistic Director, and I'm thrilled today to be in conversation with our brand new Artistic Director, Genée Coreno, who is here with me, and I'm excited to talk to her about some of her artistic influences and her artistic life. So you get to meet her. Hi, Genée.
Hi, Talya. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm excited for folks to get to know me through this video. So thanks for thinking of this idea.
Great. Can you tell us about how and when you first fell in love with theatre as an art form?
Yeah, I was thinking about the answer to this question when you proposed it to me, and I realized that theater has always been at the backdrop of my life. I'm from the Capital District. I grew up in Mechanicville and Albany and Saratoga. And so my mom and my grandma and my aunt would always bring me to Steamer 10 or Proctor's, The Egg. And I remember loving the planetarium at the museum in Albany because there was a storytelling component to that. So I remember very vividly what an impact the interactions I had with, Capital Region performers, puppeteers, clowns when I would attend something like a first night, which was our New Year's Eve celebration. And I don't think I was really conscious of that. But I can see now how having access to the arts really did impact me and grew my curiosity as I was evolving and developing as a young person. But it really wasn't until an eighth grade trip to New York City when I took a character development class with an actor from The Lion King that I knew in an instant that that's what I was going to do the rest of my life. I wanted to create and embody other people and other worlds. So yeah, that was really the spark. And I think I was lucky enough to have other influences in the area as I was growing up. Michael Kennedy, who now runs Creative Action, was teaching at production workshop at New York State Theater Institute. And that was hugely impactful because it really opened up my mind to um, other types of theater and other types of ensemble-based making, how you can find a piece of text and make it a story with others around you, and also find a sense of belonging and healing through that practice. So that was really unique and stood out to me. And then later I worked with Brenny Campbell, who taught at New Visions, which was a program through BOCES. And we learned everything from the economics to writing to improvisation. And so I think at the time, I always felt like there wasn't a lot of access to the arts, but I was very lucky to find these important and often powerful women to lead me and to challenge me. I was really looking for a challenge at that age.
Perfect. Well, just to expand on that, I'd love to hear more about your theatre influences and training as you grew older and moved out of the area.
Yeah, I went to Purchase College for undergrad. I studied drama studies and with a concentration in directing. And my first project that I directed was with a very large cast. I think we were like 12 or 13 girls from all diverse backgrounds and places in the world. And we did The Skriker by Carol Churchill. And we were looking at motherhood and what is considered a normal mother or an abnormal mother. And we're kind of resisting and like fighting against those ideas through this mythology that Carol Churchill creates in that play. I went I after I graduated, I went on to study with different dance theater makers because I had seen a lot of dance theater when I was an undergrad. People like Rachel Dickstein from Ripe Time, Annie B. Parsons at Big Dance Theater, Anne Bogart did a beautiful production called Under Construction with City Company. And so I was really looking after undergrad to work with women. I knew I wanted to tell stories by and for women. And so I was able to observe or work for these individuals and support their creative process, either as a company manager or an artistic associate or a line producer.
Mhm.
And that really gave me both a sense of how do you run a company or how can you run a company, and how I wanted to hold space in a room and what kind of processes I'd want to engage in. So ideas like non-hierarchical use of space. No one element is more important than another. So I'm always looking at design as much as I'm looking at the performance, as I'm looking at how do audience members enter a space.
Mm,
So that was hugely influential. And then just before I went to grad school at NYU, I took a trip with Theater Me Too.
mm,
And they're another ensemble-based company that makes a lot of work that infuses technology, but all other cultural practices. So they do these learning trips, and I was a part of the fellowship that went to Japan. I always knew I was interested in theater from Japan. I really love the idea of like where and when and how we build theaters, which comes from the Greek theatron, which means it's a seeing space. So,
mm.
when I was in Sicily over the summer, I got to go to some theaters that were Greek theaters, and they're overlooking like mountains and landscape. And, it really opens up to some overview. But in Japan, they built a lot of theaters over um, uh, graves. And so every time someone stomps on the floor, they're bringing up the spirits. And I felt like that really connected to me in thinking about how we devise and channel storytelling when you're an ensemble theater maker or devised theater maker like I am. So I was in Japan, and we got to travel to Tokyo and Kyoto, and we studied with the National Bunraku School, National No. We did Ikebana, we did Zazen, we did tea ceremony. And at that point in my career and in my creative practice, I knew that I was really interested in slowing down the process
Mhm.
and slowing down the performance. And I think, studying with like Sankaijuku, Butoh, or, going to a tea ceremony and being able to observe a beautiful object, it does allow your brain to make a lot of different connections. Um, and so you'll see that in my work that there's different play with duration and tempo. Um, because of that trip. But that's kind of a recap of my
Right.
education. I went to NYU. I studied with Barbara Browning and Fred Moten, um, and just yeah, that's been it. But a lot of it is, learning by doing, learning by observing, trying to find ways in to rooms that are challenging to have access to sometimes. So, you know, company managing was a great way for me to get an inside view.
Great. Yeah, you probably observed a lot of different rehearsal processes through that as well.
Definitely.
Let's talk about the work you produce on stage as a creator director, and just go into a little bit more depth. Most recently at your company Fringe and Fur in New York City, what sort of ideas and stories are you inspired to showcase on stage? Can you give us a couple of examples?
Yeah, for sure. I I work in a collaborative process at Fringe and Fur. Um, but largely like the initial seed idea comes from something that I feel really compelled to share.
Mhm.
And that could be in the form of an image, or I hear a line in my head, or I remember a line from a book that I had read a really long time ago, or a song I listened to, as a child or something. But the stories we end up telling really examine the way that um, identity and fantasy are transformed by our environment, by experience of violence, and gender and the construct of gender. Um, and again, like really influenced from those that I've practiced with, looking at found text. So it could be poetry or a book, or I used interviews with Georgia O'Keeffe and Andy Warhol for Hopelessly Hopeless. Um, and moving those together. But so I'll have the text. I kind of have an idea of what I'm trying to create. And then together as the ensemble, we build scores of movement, and we start laying music onto it. And the music helps um, bring up the subtext of the text and the movement together. And we can either slow it down, or we can speed it up or we can create dissonance. So I think what I always want to achieve is like a really dense atmosphere. And I think when you start getting all of these different modalities working together at the same time, it does produce that for you. And so you get a better sense of like, what is the full world, the full fantasy of the characters in the world that's playing on stage.
Mm.
And I'm like addicted to finding that for every given play that we work on. Um, so the perfect example, if there ever was one, was the hopelessly hopeless story of all good girls. And that to me is the ideal process because I worked on it from a very, from a very over 3 iterations. And
Mhm.
so in the first iteration, it was shared, and I was actually performing in it, which I don't do very often. But we shared it at a festival, and we were able to kind of take from that what we could, and then realize, okay, there's another layer of research that we want to go into in the next phase, and we want to develop part of the design more. Um, and so then we moved it into the third and final production, which premiered at the Brick Theater when Teresa Buchheister became artistic director. So it was like one of the opening shows for their appointment as artistic director. And it was one of the first times I'd gotten to see my work really fully embodied.
That hill up here, someday he'll come along.
And so that play really focused on, it takes place in Longmont, Colorado. It was inspired by a photograph by Robert Adams, where you can see the back of a woman's head, and she's looking off frame, but there's this image right in front of her that, because of the rule of threes in composition, the viewer is looking at the landscape in the woman's house, but the woman is looking off to the left. And I thought that's can be such an American condition to
Mm.
be looking in one direction, um, but there's something else going on over here, or we're saying one thing, but we have a lot of subtext that we're trying to get to. And so I try to imagine the world of that woman who's in that photograph, what it was like to live in the end of the 1960s with this American malaise. That was an idea that was coined by a president at the time. And it also exploring what it means to be trapped in a home, in a very suburban home for women, and what kind of fantasies come out of that. And so you do get to observe um, uh, a young woman and a next door neighbor who's also a woman have this kind of affair, if you will, like almost like a non-physical attraction. And they're exploring their sexuality through, looking at each other through the window or having telephone calls or meeting in the backyard.
Mm.
Um, and so, yeah, in an ideal process for me, we would take a long time, one, to accommodate the needs of performers who, have different things that they need to accomplish in their lives, including like working during the day. So we would rehearse 2 or 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times a week, and then we would show our work iteratively to make space for that and make the process more flexible and more realistic for all of us to achieve. Um, and then the second important project was more autobiographical. It took place during the pandemic, and it was called Madge Love, which you can watch online on my website, Fringe and Fur. And it is looking at what it meant to be a girl in a deindustrialized space like upstate New York can be in some communities. Um, it felt very hyper masculine to live at that time, being 15 in that environment. And I remember the sense of wanting to be emancipated and us really being stuck in location, either because there was a lack of transportation or a lack of money or a lack of interest in parenting. But there were really adult things that happened to girls that shift um, the way we imagine ourselves and relate to love. And so I wanted to explore that between these two girls. And they are in love with each other, but they're also friends. And they kind of speak French badly to share the harder things in life. And we get to experience like the fantasy they're having and the softness in the harder environment um, through journaling or their imagination, like these very hyper imaginative scenes. Um, so that was a really like crucial project for me. I felt very vulnerable because it went out in the internet instead of sitting in an audience and receiving the audience's energy as I was letting that out into the world. But it felt really like a turning point for me in my career.
That's great. And as you join WHAM, and as you know, WHAM operates at the intersection of arts and activism, wonder if you could speak to how theatre is an activist art form for you and what you might be looking forward to as you, it's very early days, but as you take the helm, the artistic helm of WHAM.
Yeah, I've always been really passionate about racial justice and the way that that intersects with women's rights and specifically reproductive rights and birth justice and gender. And so I see those things intersecting each other. And in my 20s, you would have seen me protesting or clinic escorting. I was training to be a doula for a while because I understood the statistics that, you know, Black, Brown, and Indigenous women are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in childbirth
Right.
um, than other folks. And so um, I found a way to kind of hold a space for the advocacy that lies inside of choosing what stories you're going to tell, making sure there's access for folks to participate and to receive those stories. Um, and working with women, non-binary people who want to be in have the opportunity to make work and to do that in a way that feels fair and just. So there's that aspect of my creative life. And then I balance that with a professional career at either arts organizations or like maternal health organizations like Every Mother Counts, which is where I'm coming from, that are dedicated to making the world a better place for women and those who identify as being women or non-binary people. And so um, to me, the idea that this position at WHAM became available was the perfect mixture of the two,
Mm.
my two worlds. I knew I had always followed the work that WHAM was doing. I love the way that there's partnership beyond the theater into the community, and that's happening on a lot of different levels. Um, and so I just saw it and I was like, I don't know what's going to happen, but it feels meant to be given my career and what I've been interested in. And so I think I'm interested in finding ways that I can take what I learned at Every Mother Counts and have a greater impact on the community here, but also use WHAM as a space to include more voices and create an opening for all different types of storytelling to happen. We'll obviously always do our main stages. That's so important. But I'd also love to see different modalities being showcased because I know that depending on what your experience has been, you know, maybe a play in a traditional sense might be a difficult way to capture that, but that story still needs to be told. And so if it's a hybrid of dance and technology, or if it's a spoken word, or there's just so many ways and so many ways that women are telling stories and embodying that experience to be shared with others that I'm really excited about and think that there's hunger for. And yeah, I've been really warmly welcomed by the community here. And so over time, I'm sure I'll get to know everyone and find other ways that are useful to the community to collaborate.
Thank you so much, Genée, for talking to me today. I'm obviously thrilled that you're here, and we're excited to welcome you. And I'm excited to share um, our new season with all of those out there in a couple of weeks, and hope that we'll both see you at the theatre very, very soon. Thank
Yes,
you.
look forward to it.